Welcome to this week's episode of the Education Insight Podcast, where we explore the depths of how students learn and interact within their educational spheres. I'm your host, Owen Johnson, and joining me today is James Legendre, a new face in the field of student engagement and classroom dynamics. He's got some great insights in his upcoming novel, The Final Essay, and I've been itching to get him on the podcast for a while. James, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Owen. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about something as critical as student engagement, especially in programs like AVID. Specifically, I was hoping we might discuss some of the patterns of engagement I saw with students working in pairs, how the teacher's proximity affected their attentiveness, and how solution-oriented my students were.
I think we might have some members of the audience who maybe aren't as familiar with AVID as we are. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
I'd love to, Owen. AVID is an educational program designed to help students, particularly those from traditionally underrepresented groups in higher education, develop the skills they need to be successful in college. It basically emphasizes writing, critical thinking, reading, and it's trying to use collaborative and student-centered learning approaches as much as possible. It's supposed to be a strategic support structure for these kids, and the idea is to have older students volunteer to tutor small groups to provide, kind of a level of personalized guidance and individual attention that's just very difficult to replicate in a normal classroom environment.
I see. And what was your role within AVID?
Oh, I was just a tutor. So I was at Boulder High this semester, where I was working with a group of 5 freshman students, all of whom identified as Hispanic. And basically, they would go up to the whiteboard with a question and work together with me and their peers to figure it out.
Fantastic. Diving into your experience with AVID, I'd love some insight on how these students engage with their learning environments. It's always been my feeling that students' engagement is really shaped by the social systems we find ourselves in. So what can you tell us about it?
Oh, great question. Well, Owen, it's a big part of engagement in classrooms, especially in AVID. I think often revolves around the interaction between students, as you pointed out. For example, I had a lot of success using something we call a board buddy, where 2 students would pair up with each other when they went to the board, and that significantly increased the amount of student-to-student interaction and just general participation I saw.
Are there any specific stories that come to mind?
Well, not sure how much I can get into it here, but yeah, I had 2 students who just refused to do anything at the board until I introduced the idea to them. But after 3 weeks of working with a buddy, they had built up the confidence to do it alone for the rest of the semester. Oh, and actually I had another one where she always asked for a board buddy, even though she was basically doing all the work herself every time. It was just like the buddy was there for emotional support, and it helped her.
Yeah, it never hurts. How do you see this aligning with broader educational research?
Yeah, that's a great question, Owen. There was actually a great study by Joe Bowler and Megan Staples on called Creating Mathematical Futures Through Equitable Teaching Approaches, and really shed light on this. They found that when students are encouraged to work collaboratively in groups, not only does their understanding of mathematics improve, but it actually also helped them become more engaged and communicative with the content.
Oh, that's really cool. How does this relate specifically to what you were saying, the board buddy system?
Well, I think similar to the study's approach, the board buddy system really fostered environments where students aren't just learning alongside each other, they're actively participating in the learning process. I saw a huge leap in engagement, especially with those that were most unwilling to participate normally. In fact, it worked so well, I would recommend any new tutor try it if they face a similar issue.
Well, that's really interesting. So, if I understand correctly, the presence of a friend not only makes the task more enjoyable, but also more engaging.
Correct.
Speaking of participation, that's been a major struggle lately for a lot of educators. What was your experience with getting students' attention, especially with the prevalence of phones in the classroom?
Yeah. At first, it was actually so bad that one of my students got pulled aside by the teacher who had a long talk about failing out of high school with him before he was willing to do anything.
So it sounds like the immediate risk of failing was maybe motivating, but it seems sort of superficial, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, Owen. it's a quick fix, right? It gets the job done, but it doesn't necessarily engage the student in a meaningful way. Um, this was closely examined in Dennis Pope's book, Doing School, and she discussed how the pressure to perform well academically just leads to stressed, materialistic students. Her research shows that students are often engaged with material not out of a genuine interest, but because they're trying to meet the expectations placed upon them, and that's exactly what I was seeing.
I see, I see. And, I would argue our broader educational systems, they're more designed to reinforce authority figures as competent and, they demand attention by right of that said competence, rather than encouraging engagement through interest. Our system rewards engagement only when authority figures are present, and there are direct consequences.
Yeah, that's something my experience definitely corroborates. In AVID, students' engagement really notably shifted depending on the teacher's presence, right? So while they're typically disengaged and distracted on their phones, it was something I saw their behavior shift rapidly when the teacher approached, and they'd pay closer attention or at least put their phones away.
I had a previous guest, Victoria Hand, come and give an account of her time observing classrooms. One of her key findings was that when students were given more ways to show competence in the classroom, behavior problems decreased and students paid better attention. Was that something you saw with Avid?
Yeah, absolutely, Owen. Looking back on this semester, it's clear that the more I backed off and let students do their own work, uh, and work off of each other, the more they were engaged and willing to pay attention to others. Uh, when I wasn't trying to control every aspect of their learning, I just wasn't required to police their behavior as well.
I don't think that's a you issue. In much the same way, I've noticed that our education system views competence via standardized test scores, right? Which could discourage teachers and students from deviating from these prescribed methods that they're known to produce, desirable results.
Yeah, I noticed with my AVA group that students tend to focus on finding the quickest solution to problems, and that often, resorting to memorize steps instead of understanding the underlying concept. And for them, it was more about getting the correct answer than the learning process. I had students getting angry excuse me, about exploring topics outside of what they were taught, or even just exploring what they were taught in greater detail.
Sounds to me like they really aren't enjoying those subjects as they're being taught. Do you think this is a motivation problem? And if so, how do you think we can address it?
Well, when I talked with the students about how they feel about math, only one of them said they liked it, and the other four really didn't. And I think it's easy for us as educators to pawn it off as motivational issues and blame students, but the strong preference towards algorithmic problem solving to me suggests a classroom environment where the focus is on correct answers rather than understanding underlying principles. This might be due to a curriculum or teachers that emphasize rote memorization instead of just conceptual understanding or trying to engage interests.
Yeah, yeah.
And in my opinion, if we want to address these problems, it's important to look at what we can do. And here the research is clear, right? Students need ownership of their learning,
I
like
see.
we were talking about before, right?
Mm.
In fact, there's another article, Learning for a Reason, by Melissa Garesi and Sasha Barab. And it really drives home the point that designing tasks uh, and having a classroom environment that's positive can significantly influence how students engage with the content. It suggests that when tasks are challenging,
Mm-hmm.
but also clearly connected to real world applications, students see a reason to engage.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, making the content more focused on the why and less on the how could help address some of the uninterest we see. When the students focus on route memorization or when they resist deeper inquiry.
Yeah, it's certainly something I think would help.
That's a really sharp observation, but not as sharp as a razor from Manscaped. Stay tuned for a word from our sponsors. And that's all the time we have today. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe for more discussions like this and share this episode with anyone passionate about improving education. We can be found on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.